as if something had taken us over. And so all sorts of unspeakable ideas, frightening ideas, were suddenly very, very possible.
Nigel Kneale had already played with these anxieties in his Quatermass serials of the 50s, which helped inspire an audience interest in science fiction on television. But it was the advent of manned spaceflight, with its new vision for the future, that really kick-started the fantasy genre.
Man in space at the show. I think it's a marvellous achievement. I think there'll soon be a man on the moon at this rate.
Playing on the rapidly changing technology and bold exploration of the time, in 1961 the BBC launched a new and groundbreaking science fiction series in the same year Russia put its first man into space.
The unusual thing that they did was they commissioned from Fred Hoyle, who was a proper science fiction writer and a proper scientist. It was still much more nuts and bolts science. It was in a way it was much more pro-science.
A team of British scientists intercept an alien transmission.
I'm waiting for an intelligible message from space, and here is one.
Is it intelligible?
Yes.
You can decipher it.
Oh, for heaven's sake. Look, do you think the cosmos inhabited by a load of Boy Scouts sending Morse code?
Look, what is this, Dennis?
Is it a message?
Have a look. Let me see.
Could be from a distant probe.
Or another planet.
Yes.
Mars or somewhere.
The alien signal contains instructions on how to build an all-powerful and destructive machine. Once built, the computer creates a genetic clone, a girl named Andromeda.
We know that it had two particular themes which for its time were quite advanced. One was the interest in artificial intelligence and this what this represented in terms of ethical scientific behaviour. I mean, an issue which is still, I think, very much with us today. And the second was, I think, providing a more prominent role for a woman at the centre of the narrative.
Newcomer Julie Christie was chosen as the lab technician and then alien creation Andromeda. The series transformed her from an unknown drama student into a star.
You think ties are emotional. The logic you can't deny is the strongest chain. I did what I had to. And now the logic's gone. I don't know what to do anymore.
The story was set in 1970, in a world where the scriptwriters envisaged women would be in more positions of power.
Fantasy allows you to talk about prominent social issues without being seen to be overtly addressing them, not just with issues like the Cold War, but also with things like sexual revolution, with changes in the generations. The 60s was a period of contestation and change when the previously accepted hierarchies are really being tackled and being challenged.
A for Andromeda was a breakthrough in television fantasy. A massive 13 million viewers tuned in to watch the climactic final episode.
The original show is much more about how science and technology is hampered by politics and big business. I mean, still, it would be worth remaking it because that's still a really interesting set of issues. You know, those are still things we really have to deal with. You know, people ask you, are you afraid of, genetic engineering or whatever? And you say, no, of course you're not afraid of that. You're just afraid of who could make money out of it. Those are the scary people, not the people in the labs.
The early 60s also saw ITV using fantasy as a vehicle to push the boundaries of the role of women. The Avengers was a spoof secret agent series headed by two maverick crime busters. They were initially a male duo, but it wasn't until a new face burst onto the scene that the series began to hit its stride.
The reason that Honor Blackman came in was that ABC had contracted, I think, 4 or 5 scripts and paid for them. And rather than throw them away when they decided to make Steed's partner a woman, they just kept the same scripts. They hardly changed them at all. So Honor Blackman was reading a man's part and doing the sort of things you'd expect of a man.
Don't do that.
Why not?
I feel like a projectionist.
She became really, I suppose, the forerunner of the most emancipated woman in television.
Oh, did you find out about that man I met down there?
Roy Hopkins?
Was his car registration a London one?
Yep. There are only two Roy Hopkins in the phone book. One is an accountant and the other runs a cracker factory.
It's a partnership of the past and the future. You have John Steed, Patrick Macnee, who dresses like an Edwardian city gent, the bowler hat, but he is partnered with, balanced with, women who represent the future, which means that they have to dress up in those sometimes really rather charmingly absurd outfits. Obviously you have the high fashion design. I think Patrick Macnee designed his own clothes, but they brought in proper people to do the women.
This idea of having a female protagonist who had equal power to the male protagonist was a pretty new one at the time. She is really holding her own alongside a male character, and she's very feminine, but she's in a relatively macho world. She's a spy, she's solving crimes, she's not your sort of Miss Marple kind of detective, she's active, she's physical.
Honor Blackman was enrolled in a crash course in judo, and within weeks became adept at throwing extras across the studio.
As long as we kept within the budget and within the bounds of good taste and within the bounds of what made an Avengers, which nobody really knew, but we instinctively knew what didn't make an Avengers, then I was given carte blanche.
Mrs. Gale, I think you owe me an explanation.
I personally have been terribly influenced by Alfred Hitchcock, who was able to tell quite gripping stories and at the same time pepper them with naughty sexuality and with good humour. And I always said that The Avengers was quite a dirty-minded show, if you had a dirty mind, but your Aunt Agatha could watch it with no qualms at all.
Honor Blackman's striking outfits sparked an explosion of leather fashion in London, and the increasing popularity of the show even spawned a novelty record. It wasn't a great success, but it was an indication that fantasy television was having an influence beyond the small screen.
Everybody's going for those kinky boots, kinky boots.
Kinky boots, it's a manly kind of fashion that you borrowed from the brutes.
Borrowed from the brutes. Kinky boots.
You must remember it was in the swinging 60s, when not quite anything went, but it was going that way. And kinkiness, you could say, kinkiness was a word that hadn't been used, I don't think.
The BBC was looking for its own fantasy show to stay ahead of ITV. And Sidney Newman, creator of The Avengers, was hired from ITV as head of drama and assigned to come up with a science fiction series.
Could I dream up some kind of drama that would cater to the children, which would be livelier and so on? And so I dreamed up the idea of Doctor Who.
Sidney did want an educational thrust so that the scientific side of it was based in some kind of reality. I hadn't really done science at school, so I didn't really understand any of it, which I think was a bit of a disappointment to Sidney. And he had said to me very, very much at the beginning, he said, you must not have what he called BEMs, which are bug-eyed monsters.
None of these creepy, crawly things from outer space, the usual nonsense of science fiction stuff. And then she came out with this Dalek business, and I was livid with anger.
You understand? Exterminated. I understand.
We put the Dalek serial out, and of course it catapulted Doctor Who immediately into being this incredibly successful show. And I think, though Sidney was very cross with me about these BEMs, he was, of course, also very pleased that it was such a success and so quickly.
Against the backdrop of a world obsessed with space travel came the timely arrival of the Daleks to conquer the Earth.
It starts with the TARDIS appearing in a ruined London of the future, and the Doctor and his sidekicks wander around. They encounter some kind of robotized zombies.
When I give the word, turn and dive in the water.
And at the very end, a Dalek comes out of the Thames. It's still a classic image.
We see a sort of imaginary narrative, which is almost an allegory of what might have happened in Britain in 1940 had Britain been invaded. And so we see a sort of fascistic police force brutally suppressing opposition. And I think that very much becomes a metaphor for Britain standing alone during that key period in 1940.
American monsters tended to be communists, but in Britain we were still hung up on World War II, so our monsters tend to be Nazis.
Look, the disease has reached us in here.
As would-be universe conquerors go, uniquely childish, in that they were supposed to come from this stratified, mechanistic, materialist, high-tech genius society, but individual Daleks seem to be having hissy fits every 10 seconds.
But what are we to do? Is this the end of the Daleks?
My guess is that's how fascist society survive, is on those horrible middle management guards, we were just obeying orders, it's not our fault, puffed up, sort of little Hitlers, and, that's what the Daleks were.
It's got that wonderful thing where you can just change the casting of the character. I love that, because then because you always have trouble with actors. As soon as he gives trouble, out. You get somebody else in. It's a producer's dream.
Regenerating the Doctor allowed the series to evolve with the times. As the decade moved into its more druggy phase, scripts became more surreal.
There's one particular Doctor Who story called The Mind Robber, which is rather different from the usual invasion and monster stories. And this has the TARDIS apparently disintegrating and the Doctor and his companions being plunged into an entirely surreal world, drawn up from their own imaginations. It's the kind of thing when you sit watching it that you sometimes wonder, how did the idea for this come about? Just what were the script writers taking at the time? What were they on?
Jamie, look!
What is it?
It's very faint, but I think it's my home again.
Zoe, it's a trick now, you know it is.
Oh, Jamie, it's gone.
You can see that Doctor Who was influenced by the Avengers in that the girls started wearing stranger outfits, and they would always try and get the actresses to do slightly more Honor Blackman type stuff, but actually in the end the job of a girl on Doctor Who was runaway screening.
Elsewhere on television, the future was less scary. Programs like Tomorrow's World embrace futuristic robots and clever machines with enthusiasm, especially as Britain was now at the forefront of new technological developments.
It looks primitive, but so did the first motor car. And this walks on the level as well as downstairs. The robot will have to see where it's going, and Professor Thring has designed this firefighting device, which not only sees but spots the fire, goes to it, and puts it out.
But the fantasy genre often explored a more sinister side of this revolution, technology gone bad, expressing people's fears of an automated society.
Come along, Benson, don't be nervous. He's quite harmless until programmed. Then only I can stop him. He's like a child. But one day...
One Avengers episode features a mad, crippled scientist who is obsessed with automation.
He's a sort of technocrat supreme, and he wants to remodel society based on entirely automated robotic lines. And to this extent, he's developed a prototype killer robot, the Cybernaut. And this sort of reflects a sort of interest in or concern over, I think, automation, scientific progress gone too far and taken to the extreme.
As well as contending with crazed robots, Steed had to take on a new and challenging partner.
The name Emma Peel was invented by a publicist. And this girl came up with M appeal, man appeal. And we liked it instantly because it became Emma Peel. And Emma was a name that was just coming back into parlance. At that time, Victorian names for models and young girls on the King's Road was coming back into fashion. And Peel was a good, strong, do you ken John Peel British name? So it was perfect. So we adopted it immediately. It's the best idea I never had.
It's a short-wave device, works like a guided missile.
Well, get rid of it.
Don't worry, I will.
That won't help you, Steve. This one has a brain of its own.
My thought was that they had been lovers and they expunged that. They'd had a wild affair, knew each other very well sexually, and then had become good friends, so that now they could work together very closely without any of those sexual tensions. Other people thought perhaps she's wooing him into bed. Some people thought perhaps Steed is going to marry her one day.
The Avengers, started out as a straight spy thriller mystery show, and edged into a sort of bizarre, parodic, sort of Edwardian version of the Bond series.
The Avengers received a complete stylistic overhaul in order to attract an international audience. In a now more liberated 60s, the series also began explicitly to play with other kinds of fantasy.
We have a scene that is both pushing the boundaries in terms of the representation of women, and that is also corresponding to conventional notions of women as an object of physical desire. You have both of those things happening at the same time, and actually they work to reinforce each other, because the way in which Emma fights shows off her physique all the more in this kind of tight catsuit with the whip. So both of those things actually sort of almost reinforcing each other in that sequence.
Very impressive. Now, what do you like with the big boys?
The funny thing about that show is, first of all, we had to take out 2 whiplashes for this country. And in America, it was banned altogether, which was an accolade in a sense. But although it was banned by ABC Television America, I know for a fact they used to show it at all their conferences.
In contrast to Britain, America had been enjoying colour television for a decade, and so forced another big change in the Avengers' style.
The Avengers really screamed out for colour, like the Wizard. You can't imagine a black and white Wizard of Oz, can you? I mean, it just screams out for colour because it's fantasy. And when it did come, it was liberating and enabled us to do lots of episodes like Epic, for instance, which is so colourful and is a send-up on the film industry.
A ZZ von Schnurk production!
ZZ von Schnurk, who was a kind of von Stroheim character, complete with leather boots and riding whip. He kidnapped Emma Peel and set about making the real death of Emma Peel. It's the first snuff movie.
Mrs. Peel? We're waiting for you.
We didn't have any social problems. We don't think we touched upon drugs. Mind you, at that time, drugs weren't such a problem as they are now anyway. But I don't think we would if we made it now. We wouldn't go down that street. The mean streets of Raymond Chandler were not for us.
It does end up with Emma tied to a circular store, sort of stereotype of the woman about to meet a grisly death.
You are not feeling the part, Mrs. Peel.
I have a feeling, I will be feeling it.
Sort of stereotype of the male hero coming and rescuing her. But the difference is that Emma's so completely cool. She doesn't scream, she doesn't struggle. She just lies there, waits for Steve to get on with his fight, and, you know, is not perturbed at all. So it has that sort of wonderful, sort of detached, knowing edge that, that the Avengers episodes had.
It's a pantomime. The Avengers is a pantomime. And why the Americans loved it is they think that London is like that and the English are like that.
Bold as a knight in white armor.
While ITV was riding high on the success of The Avengers, the BBC was busy creating a rival series, but with rather different production values.
I was petrified all the time. We had to do the whole thing in 6 days. We had 2 days in the studio. We had 1 day out on film. We had 3 days to try and learn the lines. We never had time to learn the fights. We then had to go into the studio shaking with fear and try and put the whole show together in an hour and a quarter. So there wasn't time to stop for anything at all. There was a young man who had to grab me and take me from set to set because I didn't know where I was or what I was doing from beginning to end. It was weekly rep with a better dressing room.
This man is the one.
The BBC didn't have the same scale of budgets that independent television could afford. So it didn't therefore have the same level of production values. It's significant, I think, that a lot of BBC drama, most BBC drama, was produced on videotape. It wouldn't be intended for the export market.
Once again, the man behind the new series was the creator of Doctor Who and The Avengers, Sidney Newman.
There was some building work going, and he was idly looking out of his office window, and a man was going with one of those pneumatic drills, and he had that magic word, what if?
Yes, look!
What if they uncovered a glass coffin and a man came out from 100 years ago? So a few months later, there I was, looking bloody stupid, lying in a glass coffin.
A Victorian gentleman adventurer is frozen in a block of ice by his arch-enemy. He is revived in 1966 by a typical swinging 60s chick.
I'm not a boy, I'm a girl.
It was an exquisite comedy of manners, really. The idea was that you brought the manners of the Victorian society suddenly slap bang into conflict with 1966, so that there he was, stunned, first of all at a bus going along at 40 miles an hour, and then at a girl with beautiful long legs sticking out of a miniskirt, which were really rather worrying.
Georgina Jones. You can call me Georgie.
Miss Jones, this masculine attire, is it part of the madness outside? Some protective disguise, perhaps?
Hey, watch it. This gear cost me a bundle.
This gear cost me a bundle. That is some kind of code.
Everything's bound to seem a bit strange.
Strange? The fires of hell could be no stranger.
You'll find it's all quite normal in the
I
morning.
very much doubt that, Miss Jones.
Please, rest.
Where am I?
You're quite safe. You're in my room.
Your room? Then I must leave immediately.
Why?
Well, think. Your reputation, Miss Jones.
Adam Adamant was a good character. You know, it was a very traditional boy's own adventure, swashbuckling, hero of empire. And there was a sense that in the 60s we were starting to be into being British in a way that maybe we hadn't since the age of Rider Haggard and Sherlock Holmes or whatever. So it was quite a clever idea to bring a figure who represented those values into the then modern day.
We never rehearsed the stunts. Derek Ware, the great stuntman, I went down for a stunt one day. He said, here you are, this is what you do. He said, because it was in a gym, he said, you jump through the window, you hit the horse, over the horse, grab the walls, turn round, we'll have a rope ready, you swing across the rope, and then you leap out of the window on the other side. I said, do you think you could show me how to do it? He said, not bloody likely. He said, it's dangerous, you know.
Adam Adamant was tied to this very specific cultural moment of swinging London, so that within a few years it actually seems rather dated. It doesn't have the flexibility for change and continuity in the way that some of the other longer running drama series, popular drama series, do.
Oh, Miss Jones.
I thought it was a super idea, and why they don't remake it, I don't know. It's so much more fun now because, you know, the guy, he came back from about 1890 or something, didn't he? He was like a Rip Van Winkle who woke up and the world had moved on. Well, my God, it's moved on a lot since the time he woke up. I mean, the world is very different now.
In 1967, fantasy television took a more intellectual turn with a new series, The Prisoner, that would really challenge audiences. Its star was Patrick McGoohan, who had risen to become the highest-paid British actor on television as a result of the successful spy thriller series, Danger Man. Off the back of Danger Man, McGoohan helped to create and write The Prisoner that was to turn the adventure thriller on its head.
The script arrived and I couldn't make head or tail of it, quite honestly. It was so way out because it was about a secret agent who had resigned and he's attacked and he wakes up in a curious village where everybody is sort of saying happy day and they're all happy, but nobody dares to ask why. Why are we here? I thought, oh yes, I see, it's a sort of parody of what happened to Patrick when he was doing Danger Man, because he was so embroiled with it that he used to live in the studio. He had to work on scripts all the time to make them better, and he worked terribly hard, and I think he made himself a prisoner of that series.
I suppose you're wondering what you're doing here.
It hadn't crossed my mind. What's it all about?
Sit down and I'll tell you. It's a question of your resignation.
Every other series, the hero would start from a position of safety. They would get involved in some kind of conflict that would involve them in some kind of danger, and then they would return to their position of safety, having solved the conflict and problem. And McGoohan, in The Prisoner, his position is completely reversed. He starts trapped and he ends trapped. And CBS were very concerned, actually, about buying the series for America because they thought that American audiences wouldn't identify with a loser.
In fact, the character played by McGoohan was not a loser, but a man obsessed by the idea of freedom and the right to be an individual.
I will not be pushed, filed, stamped, indexed, briefed, debriefed, or numbered. My life is my own.
Is it?
Yes. You won't hold me.
The Prisoner was not an easy ride. The first episode, Arrival, was unlike anything else that had been on our screens. It was unusual, very visually different. I was watching it religiously each week on a Friday night, and of course all my pals and girlfriend at the time would say, "You're not coming out tonight?" Knowing what the answer would be, "No, I'm staying in and watching The Prisoner." My particular girlfriend at the time, I think she lost patience and she was not prepared to hang on another perhaps 12 weeks or so, and so I lost that one.
It's all about control, it's all about power. And that is kind of how a lot of people felt in the 60s, and I think The Prisoner really spoke to that. And it's also why it remains a current cult. It's still the way a lot of people feel about the world, and indeed probably feel much more that way about the world now.
By the final episode, those who'd stuck it out were waiting for answers to the many questions raised over the past 16 weeks.
If you watched The Prisoner the first time it went out and you were following it, the assumption was that all would be revealed.
My life is my own. I.
The ATV switchboard was jammed by viewers complaining about the incomprehensible finale. The Prisoner's creators were under attack by both the audience and the critics.
The distribution company, the network, ATV, put out an explanation of The Prisoner. One of their correspondents wrote this idiot's guide, if you like, saying the butler meant this, the penny farthing meant that, the village was this, and so on, and were sending it to disgruntled viewers.
The fact that it has an open ending, the fact that it goes beyond the rational into the surreal, meant that it's endlessly rewatchable. You can go back and still project your own meaning onto it. And this is a very 1968 approach, isn't it? That was the year of 2001 and Yellow Submarine and all manner of other blow-up fictions that took that approach.
Although a cult series today, at the time, Lou Grade, head of ATV, found it a difficult property to sell.
The final episode, I think, was a sort of revenge against the pressure that Lou Grade had put on Patrick. The Prisoner, quite frankly, he didn't see how he could sell because it was so intellectual. It was like something in Chinese, really. And so Lou didn't like it, and that was why that episode was a bit of a mess, with great respect.
McGoohan had shot from acting obscurity to become a national figure in a highly controversial series. But for many, he had taken fantasy too far. Against this backdrop of criticism of the fantasy genre came the timely arrival of Nigel Kneale's drama set in a world completely monopolized by television. It was as if the medium had turned around and taken a long, hard look at itself.
At that time, the big thing was overpopulation. That's the great dread that the population of the world would just go right out of control, and you'd have universal starvation.
The storyline has pornographic shows being used for population control, based on the assumption that if people watched enough live sex on television, they would soon lose interest in it themselves. But it goes wrong when audiences become bored. Then an accidental death is screened live, and a new concept emerges: reality television.
Suppose you've got just a few people to live like old days and watch them to make a show.
Okay. Have to run out from everywhere, like savages, like wild men?
A group of volunteers are followed in the live show. Their every move is monitored as they fight and fend for themselves.
Found the unit.
It all turns perverse when they come across a murderer who has been planted on the island.
They roared with laughter. They were a happy audience. That was the message of the whole play, that if you did pervert people's feelings to a really massive extent, they would laugh at death. Not in a good way, but a sick way. It is not pro-television. It really isn't. It wasn't intended to be. It was just to show that this machine you got in your life is a dangerous machine.
Nigel, earns points for being a genuine prophet, and not in a sort of mystic sense. I think we tend to overvalue science fiction writers but just someone who was a television professional who saw what was happening, who was able to extrapolate from tiny little movements in the world around him to what the future might be like. And to depict it actually in extreme satirical terms in the hope of stopping that happening, in which case he failed. Because now there are television programmers all over the world greenlighting the Sex Olympics.
Just 5 months later came a real live show. Pictures of the Earth and Moon seen from the US Apollo 8 in lunar orbit were broadcast live on television. Reaching the Moon now seemed achievable.
All you do is press that button there.
This one?
Yeah.
Having run for nearly the whole decade, The Avengers was now with its third female lead, played by Linda Thorson. The series eventually reached audiences in 120 countries, a record that still stands today.
How do you stop it?
The reason for its longevity, I'm sure, is the fact that it's an anachronism. It's its own world. It'll always be fresh, in the same way that Alice in Wonderland will always be fresh. Or The Wizard of Oz. I mean, The Wizard of Oz, I saw it about a week ago, and it doesn't look like an old film because there's no yardstick to judge it by.
Can you get us down?
Eventually, yes. I still think I can.
Eventually.
There's no hurry. Is there?
None at all.
Not far behind them was Apollo 11. On the 20th of July 1969, both the BBC and ITV were broadcasting the same drama. The whole world watched men walking on the moon and experienced a real-life cliffhanger about getting them back alive. From this time on, setting a television drama somewhere in space was never going to be pure fantasy. Science fact had caught up with science fiction. It was the end of an era.
You never know you're working in the halcyon days or in a golden era until it's over and you're looking back. But for me, it was a golden era. I never had so much fun. I never laughed so many times or so much in every day. Never made so many good friends or enjoyed myself. And they were paying me well, very handsomely too. So what more could one ask, really? It was like going to heaven without having to die.
Certainly a golden age for fantasy telly, but was the 60s TV's golden age for you? TV on Trial, You Decide, tomorrow at 9 here on BBC4. Music next tonight, an intimate candlelit BBC4 session from Irish singer-songwriter Damien Rice. Stay with us.